Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rotoworld Baseball Show. I'm your host, Eric Samulski, joined again after a brief respite by my co-host, Scott Pianowski. Scott, how you doing?
Doing great. Back off vacation and ready to jump right into baseball. Let's jump right into baseball.
Yeah, we are. We got to jump right in. I did just want to touch real quick on the passing of Willie Mays. Obviously, was a huge story in the baseball world this week. Major League Baseball was planning a game today in Alabama, just 5 minutes from Willie Mays' hometown, which was meant to be this kind of continuation of the honoring of the Negro Leagues and the Negro League players. He was going to show up, and then as of last week, he was not going to show up, and now the event will take on new meaning and become a little bit more of an honoring of Willie Mays as well. So that's something, this will post Thursday afternoon. Highly encourage people to check out what Major League Baseball plans to do on Thursday night for that game between the Giants and the Cardinals. I think it could be just a really cool moment in honoring one of the best to ever do it.
Yeah, Willie Mays was widely accepted as not only the greatest living ball player, but a very strong case to be the greatest baseball player of all time. And get caught up in definitions there. Babe Ruth did not play against an integrated baseball league. Barry Bonds, of course, all sorts of enhancement in his game late in his career. The great thing about Willie Mays is there's a joy that he played with. And no matter what about a baseball player excited you, he could hit for average. He won a batting title, hit over 300 for his career. He won 12 straight Gold Gloves. He obviously hit 660 home runs, 12 straight Gold Gloves. He had that famous catch in the World Series where he over his shoulder and then he uncorks the throw coming back into the infield. Willie Mays is the reason why you fall in love with baseball. And I want to point out just one more thing about Joe Posnanski did a great post today about who's the greatest living ball player now, and it can be caught up in definitions. Who inspires the most awe among other Hall of Famers? Some people might say it's Sandy Koufax. A lot of people would say just what Bonds did on his resume makes it him. But when the criteria that Joe used, he ultimately landed on Ken Griffey Jr. because obviously Griffey was great. His 30s weren't as great as his 20s, but there's a certain reverence and joy, and just he sparks something in your imagination, kind of like the way Mays did. And so that's something we can debate. And also let's appreciate people while they're here. We had 93 great years of Willie Mays, which is fantastic. Yeah. But let's try to appreciate Sandy Koufax while he's still around. Let's try to appreciate Ken Griffey Jr. in his later years and all this stuff. And just baseball, more than any other sport, cares about legacy and stats and where your place in the game is. No other sport is as good about this as baseball is. It's one of the reasons why we get charmed by it. We all know Willie Mays has 660 home runs. I don't know if everybody knows how many touchdown passes Dan Marino had or Peyton Manning had off the top of their head, how many goals Wayne Gretzky had. But we all know 715 for Ruth, 755 for Aaron, 660 for Mays, and Willie, Mickey, and the Duke is a song we all know by heart. So Willie Mays, a life well lived, and his highlights and his legacy and what made him great is going to live on forever.
Yeah, and if you are a younger player, take this opportunity to look up not just the Mays videos, but the videos of the video that was surfacing of Vin Scully meeting Willie Mays for the first time, and just hearing these people talk about him with the reverence that they did is just, I think, a really good idea of just what he meant, not only as a player, but as a person to the game. So I'm excited to watch that. We're going to get into the fantasy news for the day, and then we're going to talk a little bit about regression and the idea of regression and who might be regressing, and then we'll end real quick with just our picks for streams of the weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday games. Bichette was placed on the IL and with a calf injury. Orelvis Martinez, the Blue Jays' top prospect, was called, one of the top hitting prospect, was called up. He has sat the first 2 games. They are off today on Thursday, so we don't know when he's going to play again. He had some real split issues at the minor leagues where he was crushing left-handed pitching and not hitting great against right-handed pitching. Power is really good. Batting average is, fine, but not spectacular overall. He was hitting 260 so far in AAA. I don't really know what the Blue Jays are getting by calling him up and keeping him on the bench. But I get the sense that he's maybe just going to play against lefties right now. I don't really know what's happening in the Blue Jays lineup, but it makes it hard to decide if I want to be involved in this Orelvis Martinez situation.
Yeah, hard to find optimism there. And I don't know what optimistic view we can give to any Bichette managers who is not hitting for power. He's kind of shut down the running game in recent years. He's become kind of an empty batting average guy. His run production numbers are really bad. We were talking a week ago about some real fringy kind of guys, some real seam calls about would you take this player Bichette over that player or Bichette, and all those calls look right. Yeah. And maybe the injury. I don't know how long Bichette had been battling this hamstring injury. I guess it was, but so maybe that explains part of his slump. But it's just crazy to think that 2 or 3 years ago we all thought, okay, wait till Vladimir Guerrero matures into like the best player in the American League. Wait till Bichette starts rattling off top 5 MVP finishes. And I just feel like even though those players are really young, I think Toronto's really close to a reckoning where it may not happen at the trade deadline. It may not happen until the offseason. Maybe it's even a year away. But I feel like this is inevitable that this core is going to get blown up. And if Bichette turns into that perennial all-star that we were all expecting, it's going to happen with a different team.
Yeah, I mean, it was a calf strain for him, and that may have impacted the running. I do think we talked about this. We don't want to belabor the point. The batting average, I think, will tick up a little bit. The power has been really impacted by the pitches he's swinging at and the ones that he can't really do damage on. But yeah, I mean, I think Toronto has to do a long, hard look at their player development because, the core is still there for them in terms of the core that we were excited about 3 years ago, and it has not developed. And maybe that's, the fault of overvaluing these players because they're the pedigree of them being, sons of really good baseball players. But I do think these are solid baseball players who have not taken the steps forward that they could have. And I think organizationally that might be something that they need to look at. Brandon Drury came back. I guess and then he didn't start yesterday, but that was just because of an illness. I guess my question to you is, like, we were interested in Brandon Drury early in the year. He did not play particularly well. He is now back, started the first 2 games and then was out with a sickness, and should maybe come back on Friday. Are you interested in Drury again in any formats, or do you need to wait and, as you say, have him hit his way onto your lineup?
Yeah, in the last couple of years, he's been a 20 to 25, 26 home run guy, qualifies at multiple positions, can hit for a playable average, won't run much. You would think he's good enough to have a regular everyday spot in the Anaheim lineup. And I don't know what the Angels are going to be able to trade at the deadline. They have a lot of solid offensive players. Luis Rengifo might look good on a contending team maybe in a month or so. So I actually re-added Drury in a medium-sized mixed league, just hoping that he can be that 20 home run guy who qualifies at multiple positions and hits for a playable average. I don't care that his slash line is really depressed right now, but I mean, he's only played a handful of games, so I'm not worried about that. I think he can go back to the player we saw the last 2 seasons, somewhere close to that.
Yeah, I'm interested in him. We also saw Lawrence Butler and Tyler Black get called back up again. Lawrence Butler, we've done the dance a little bit. I know DJ Short and I were both thinking that he might have some deep league value this year because the raw tools are really good, and he had made some improvements in AAA last year. And then Tyler Black really intrigued people because of that potential speed you could get at first base. And then the Brewers sent him down and preferred Jake Bauers about a month ago. And now it seems like they're calling him back up to make that swap, and we might see Tyler Black get regular run at first base against righties with Jake Bauers moving to the bench. We haven't yet seen that yet, and the lineups haven't come out, so we don't really know. But are you in on either of Lawrence Butler or Tyler Black in their second stint this year?
There would be a case where they'd have to produce to probably get back onto my lineup. I can't trust Oakland to play Butler every day. The way they kind of jerked him in and out of the lineup and sent him down quickly was disappointing to me. And with Black, I'm worried that this Milwaukee lineup is deep enough that he's going to be batting 7th, 8th, or 9th. So that could be a problem for him. And his AAA numbers are okay. They're not eye-popping. He's only got 9 home runs. He's hitting 275. He's got the good walk and strikeout numbers, which is encouraging. He will put the ball in play. He doesn't strike out that much, which is unusual. He's got a kind of an unusual first base profile, right? He runs, he puts the ball in play, doesn't strike out a lot. He's a decent walk rate, which isn't that uncommon, but he's not a huge power source. He'll have to hit his way onto my lineup.
Yeah, I was excited to see, or excited, I was happy to see at least, that Lawrence Butler continued the strikeout rate improvements at AAA after he got sent down, sub 20% strikeout rate, and the walk rate actually increased to almost 13% when he was down in AAA. So he really is continuing to work on that plate discipline and showing those gains. And again, he's only 23 years old, so there's a chance that continues at the major league level. He started the first game when he was back up and then sat against the lefties, so I think the expectation is that he will sit against lefties. Speaking of prospect call-ups, the Astros are calling up Jake Bloss, who is their 10th ranked prospect. He's a 22-year-old starting pitcher. He is going to start Friday against the Baltimore Orioles, which is probably not a start that you want to use him for in fantasy. And then Justin Verlander is probably on his way back. He's making progress, so he could be back for the next start. So I don't know how long we're going to see Bloss. However, I did reach out. I have the good fortune that the Astros AA pitching coach is actually a guy I know, a friend of mine who was a coach for the summer league team that I run for multiple years. And so I reached out and was basically like, hey, what can I say about Bloss online on this podcast? Like, what can you tell me about him? What should people expect? And first, he was just talking about how excited he is for him as a person and talked about how coachable he is in terms of like how quickly he picks up on stuff, that they have him working on things. And then in like 2 or 3 starts, he's like working on exactly where they want that pitch to be thrown, how they want the pitch to be thrown. He has really kind of moved up really quickly through the system. He was a 3rd round pick in the 2023 draft, right? So very recent. He has a 1.74 ERA this year in 62 innings across high A and double A. The strikeout rate has gone down in AA, but opponents are hitting 127 off him. And my friend just said, like, you usually see strikeout rates go down when guys go up a level because they're adjusting to a new level. But he says that Bloss's stuff is legit. The fastball is good. He gets great extension on the fastball, and he has a pretty good mix of secondary pitches, including a really good sweeper. So he has a 5-pitch mix that he can use to both righties and lefties. Again, a sub 8% strikeout rate in AA doesn't make me think he's going to miss lots of bats at the major league level. But I like hearing about an advanced pitchability prospect with 5 pitches who has the organization that we trust really believes in and has advanced pretty quickly up through the minor league level. So again, I would not pick him up to start him against the Orioles. And so we'll see what the long-term, chances of him are stick in this rotation, but it's certainly a start to watch on Friday when he gets that matchup.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely will be on my, one of my primary sets. Well, interesting to see a kid from Georgetown, right? I guess I'll have to watch Shane Almost Fire again, try to pick up some Georgetown stuff, but you mentioned the strikeout rate has gone down in AA, but also the walk rate. He's had a problem with walks in his pro career, but he's really trimmed that walk rate in AA. The home run rate has always been low for him in the minors. And I always like hearing, anecdotal as it may be, and you have an in on this organization, so you're getting it from good, you have a good source here. I want my players to be smart. I want my players to make adjustments. I want my players to be tinkering with things and say, okay, this worked at one level. It may not work at another level. Obviously, the Astros like him to do a double promotion, which is not that uncommon, but I just wish it wasn't the Orioles. I don't think you can start him on spec against Baltimore, but there's a silver lining here. If he goes 5 or 6 innings, allows 1 or 2 runs against that Orioles lineup, then maybe that marks his territory to stay in this rotation. We know they've had all sorts of injuries. They have some older pitchers. It's been really weird. I mean, who thought that Blanco would be the guy who would kind of save their bacon in this rotation this year? But I think Bloss is. I'm going to watch him with interest against Baltimore, but I would not at all be surprised if in the next year or two he becomes somebody who's a part of their 5-man rotation.
Yeah, I could see that. Keegan Thompson got a save for the Cubs this week and then immediately went on the paternity list, but that's a 3-day thing, so he should be back this weekend. I guess my question to you is like, are you rostering any Cubs reliever? Are you taking a gamble on Keegan Thompson? Are you still trying to run with Mark Leiter Jr. or Hector Neris, or have you thrown your hands up at the whole situation?
Yeah, I had Keegan Thompson and NL out a while ago, and then I had to drop him when injuries pinched. He wasn't pitching that well. I wonder if Chicago's going to be in the market for a reliever at the trade deadline. Such a mess. Everything they've tried has not worked out. There's been injuries. There's been underperformance, and man, thank God their rotation has been a couple of guys really outpitched. We thought Imanaga would be good. He's been great. Assad has kind of come out of nowhere. They have Steele back in the rotation. Brown was good before he got hurt. Even Kyle Hendricks out of nowhere. His seasonal stats aren't good, but he had a really good start this week. They're a strange team, Eric. There's so many underperformers on their offense.
They are.
And there's just something to – there's an emotional crush when you have a game that you think is put away and then you lose it in the late innings. I feel like those games almost feel like 2 losses sometimes. My bet is their second half saves leader, I don't think is on the roster right now.
Yeah, to me, I've always said, well, the logical choice is to go out and trade for Kenley Jansen because the Red Sox want to trade Kenley. But now the Red Sox are a game out of the wild card spot, and he seems less a lock to be dealt, at least not until we see how the next month of the season plays out and if the Red Sox think they can make a run. But yeah,
could they trade for one of the Washington guys?
They could. I think they could, or they could trade for, the Red Sox also want to move on from Chris Martin, who's in the last year of his deal. So maybe they keep Kenley and trade Chris Martin, and Chris Martin has closed before. The Washington guys make some sense. It depends how much the Cubs want to make a run. I mean, the Cubs have not lived up to what we thought they were going to be early in the year when they started out hot. They're 3 games under 500 right now. So they may, in 2, 3, 4 weeks, they may just say, listen, we'll make a run with the guys we have on the roster, and we're not going to try to give up a lot for a reliever because we just don't necessarily see our chances being that strong. So we'll see how that all plays out. A couple quick hits to end this. Walker Buehler was placed on the IL. He took a liner off the hip. I don't imagine that it will be an extended absence for him, and we will talk about who might start in his place because there's an interesting streamer there. Max Scherzer is going to debut on Saturday. We have talked about him coming back before, so we'll see that on Saturday. The Astros are, quote, hopeful that Kyle Tucker can begin baseball activities this weekend. So we'll have to keep an eye on whether he actually does begin baseball activities this weekend and how his shin responds to that. He's been out long enough that it may require a rehab stint for him for a little bit, but hopefully maybe by the end of next week, Kyle Tucker is back in an Astros lineup if everything goes well. We'll continue this Kyle section of news by mentioning that both Kyle Manzardo and Kyle Stowers were demoted to AAA again. Just another, chalk it up to more prospect hitters who have come up and not quite delivered in their first stint in Major League Baseball. And the Rockies infielder, Adel Amador, might be right behind them as Brandon Rogers nears a return from the IL as well. Anthony Rizzo was placed on the 60-day IL after the Yankees called up Ben Rice, even though the original timeline for his injury was 4 to 6 weeks. Now he's going to be out for 2 months. And there's a very real chance, given how poorly he was playing, that may be the Yankees' way of respectfully ending Rizzo's time at first base this season with the Yankees. So that is a situation to keep an eye on, but he should not be held if you were keeping him in any league. And JD Davis was cut by the Athletics. The second Bay Area team to move on from JD Davis this year. If you were rostering him in any even AL only formats, it's time to move on. Anything from that?
I don't think Walker Buehler is an automatic hold.
Ooh, interesting.
He's not pitching well. He wasn't pitching. He didn't pitch great. The last time we saw him, and I realized, he had Tommy John surgery, I believe. So you try to have realistic expectations, but his strikeout numbers are down. He's got a home run problem. I mean, the ERA is in the high fives. The FIP is over 6. The WHIP is 1.51. I realized the last start was at Colorado. You give him a pass for that, but I've started to ask myself why on these Walker Buehler teams am I automatically starting him? I think he's become somebody I had to manage anyway, and now he's hurt. I have like everybody else, I have other players on the IL. I had 2 or 3 Buehler calls to make as my bidding periods. We have twice weekly bidding periods in most of my Yahoo leagues. And Some leagues I said, okay, you're getting an IL spot. In a couple of leagues, I said, you know what, I'm going to move on from Buehler, and maybe I'll pick him up later. Maybe somebody else will get him. Maybe he'll pitch poorly for somebody else. I don't know. And if he puts it all together and is great in the second half, I'll tip my cap. But I have low expectations for the rest of the season.
Honestly, I'm not. I think in a 12-team league, that does not strike me as a poor way to approach it at all. And it's unfortunate, but that is where we're at right now. Before we get to our discussion on regression, don't miss the ultimate tryouts for a chance to represent the United States at the Olympic and Paralympic Games. This is still ongoing through June 30th. So we have 10 more days of the U.S. team trials. Noah Lyles, Simone Biles, Katie Ledecky, and more of America's best athletes compete for a spot on Team USA in Paris. Watch our country's brightest stars continue their quest for gold on Peacock and NBC. Again, that's through June 30th. So we still have a lot of time to check those out if you have not yet done so. So we are going to talk about regression for a little bit. And this started based on a discussion I was seeing online yesterday about Tarik Skubal regressing, because Tarik Skubal's stats over the last month have certainly had a downturn. And it started along, and my point was that saying that Skubal is regressing, even though he has like a 3 ERA over his last 5 starts, is technically true from a mathematical term standpoint. It is regression to his mean, right? The mean. But I think when we say regression in the context of fantasy, it has a different connotation to it. So I guess my first question to you is, like, when you say a player is regressing, or when you read that a player is regressing, what do you take in from that? What does that mean to you as a fantasy baseball player?
Yeah, it's moving towards what I think his long-term mean and projection would probably be. And it's important to note that it can be negative, it can be positive. And I always say too, when people talk about regression, it has to be regression to what? I mean, somebody will have a season where their BABIP is 385. People are like, well, that's going to regress. Like, well, to what? I mean, does he have a profile where he could have a 330 BABIP?
Right.
Or a pitcher, we know there are a couple of pitchers right now who have ridiculously low ERAs. Lopez of the Braves, his ERA is going to regress to what? Is it going to be 3? Is it going to be 2.8? Is it going to be 3.7? I talked about Walker Buehler earlier. I mean, his ERA will probably regress to something. I'm not convinced it's going to be to something playable. So to me, regression is always a great way to start a conversation. I don't like it when it's viewed as a mic drop, where people say regression and think that's a period to the whole sentence and that the discussion is over. But it's all about players. Let me make another point too. I mean, if somebody's like a career 290 hitter and they're hitting 230 and there isn't some reason why they're hurt, or they're hitting in bad luck or whatever, the idea isn't like, okay, now they're going to hit 350 to get back to like what their career average is. The idea is that you would expect them probably to start performing around what their career norm is established. Now, with younger players, we don't often know what that career norm is. They haven't played long enough. It's not reliable enough. But Bill James has a thing called the plexiglass principle, which is basically the things that are, the players or teams that are overperforming will tend to give some of it back. The teams that are underperforming will tend to pick it up a little bit. And a lot of times that's really valuable year over year. A team will be comically unlucky in 1-run games, or they'll be really unlucky with injury luck or something like that. And that tends to bounce back to the league norm the next year. So this is one of those fantasy concepts that even if you didn't know what it was called, you probably had this internally baked into your fantasy strategy for several years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting. What came up in the discussion is the idea of the mathematical term, right? Regression, meaning that something is getting closer to the mean for that particular players, right? So not the league average, not the norm, but what is our expectation of who that player is. But I think the connotation of regression, when we see it like used on Twitter or in articles, is that there is a negative slope, right? Now that is, again, not an accurate connotation based on the mathematical term, but just how it, I think, is used a lot in fantasy discourse, right? That there is a regression. And I think when people read that there's a regression, they tend to assume there's necessarily a skills component baked into it. When we say a player is regressing, I think the average person who reads that isn't thinking, oh, this is natural variance. right? Because if it's natural variance, if we're saying Tarik Skubal's regressing, but he's basically just the player we thought he was, then maybe there's really nothing to say, right? There's no skills decline. He was still missing a lot of bats. He just had a couple home runs hit against him in the last game. So if we say that he's regressing, I think a lot of people read that as like there's an issue at play. And there's not always an issue. I think that sometimes there is also the difference that there can be cold streaks over the course of a season, in particular with a pitcher, right? A pitcher can have 2 bad starts, and it's not necessarily a regression. It's the natural variance over the course of a season. And so I wanted to ask you before we get to some players is how do you differentiate between regression and just a cold streak that is taking place within a season? So for example, let's say we have a career 260 hitter and he's hitting 310 for the first 2 months of the season. So we're expecting that there is going to be something that brings him back closer to what we have seen from him over the course of his career, a regression to his mean. Well, if he has a 2-week stretch where he hits 250, how do you know that's regression? Or what if he goes and hits 300 again after the next 2-week stretch? Like, how can you differentiate between just a normal cold streak, but he has actually earned those new skills, or regression back to him being who he thought he was?
My default is that usually just this variance is part of the reasonable range of outcomes for almost any player. And what we're trying to do, and this is not always easy to do, but this is what separates good fantasy managers from the people who are kind of in the middle somewhere, is come up with reasons why. And this can be very tricky, right? If you look at the clouds long enough, you'll be convinced you see patterns. Attribution is not always easy to figure out, but why was a player underperforming or overperforming? What skills have been added? How much you might look at his expected stats? How much has he earned that ERA or earned that batting average? Has his plate discipline changed? Is he hitting the ball harder? Has he changed? Is there a something technical that he's doing? Is there a toe tap? Has he cleaned up his approach to the plate? Yeah, obviously pitchers are constantly changing things with their pitch mix, which you write about every week, or their spot on the mound, the catcher, the pitching coach, they're adding and scrapping pitches, all that stuff. So you try to figure out attribution. But that said, there's always going to be everybody. It doesn't matter who it is. Pick the best players in baseball, right? Shohei Ohtani is going to have a 10-game sample where he hits 157. That just happens. Freddie Freeman's going to do that. Mookie Betts is hurt now, of course, is going to do that. Julio Rodriguez has not been a great player for the first couple of months. It's just part of, Aaron Judge was booed by the Yankees fans 6 weeks ago or something like that. I mean, as crazy as that sounds. I mean, every player is going to have, and that's why we always talk about when somebody's hitting 197 on April 18th, we always say, well, if this happened in June or July, it probably wouldn't get that much attention because the stats have some volume to them and the numbers don't move up as much. But we're trying to look for, it's not always clear what's signal and what's noise, but we're always trying to figure out what's changed in this player's approach, what has changed in their skills, what can we point to that makes an outlier set of statistics more believable or more credible, or something we can take seriously going forward.
Yeah. And we are going to try and do that here a little bit. I picked some guys who I thought we had were discussing that they had shown new skills, right? These were guys who over the first 2 months of the season had reached kind of a new level or were showing a new sense of fantasy value, and then have struggled over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks for some of them, and trying to decide, is this regression? Meaning, are they going back to the player that they had been prior to this year? Or is this a cold streak, but some of that growth they had shown earlier in the year actually still remains? And so we should still view them differently than we did coming into the year. And so the first guy is David Fry, right? On the season, David Fry is hitting 309, and he has a 7.6% barrel rate, which has actually gone down a lot in recent weeks. But he is a 280 hitter. He hit 238 last year in 58 games. So he had been really a popular fantasy ad because he has catcher eligibility. So I guess my question to you is based on what you're seeing from David Fry. Oh, and I should mention, he is the 268th ranked player on the Fangraphs player rater over the last 2 weeks. That's a negative $7 player, hitting 211 over his last 40 plate appearances, and hitting 250 over his last 19 games with 3 home runs, 12 RBIs. Do you think this is regression and David Fry is who we thought he was coming into the year, or is this a cold streak, but he's still probably more valuable than we expected back in March?
Yeah, the second thing you said, where there's going to be a little bit of give back. He was a little bit over his skis, but especially with that catcher eligibility, I think it's easy that he's going to be a top 10 catcher the rest of the year. We love the walk strikeout rate. It's almost an even one. OPS plus is a 171. The Cleveland lineup has been a lot better than I expected. I thought that was actually going to be a average to maybe slightly below average offense. It's been like a top 5 offense all year. I would be, if there's any kind of dip you can buy into with David Fry, I'd be buying into it.
That's interesting. I don't know if I feel the same way. I'm looking at like the Fangraphs rolling charts. His swing decisions over the last 3 weeks have gotten significantly worse. His decision value is going way down, and that's contributed also to his power going way down. And a lot of this has to do with what he's swinging at outside of the zone. He was making great swing decisions outside of the zone early on. He's making poor ones now. And so I don't know that David Fry is like, he came into the year basically a 240 hitter last year with middling power. No, he had 21 home runs in the minor leagues. 17 home runs in the minor leagues in 2022, 8 home runs across last season. I think you're going to get I think he is that 240, 245 hitter. I don't know. I think maybe if they continue to use him exclusively against lefties, you might see the power tick up, but I don't know that David Fry is going to be as valuable as we thought he was if they continue to play him against righties and lefties, because the swing decisions recently have not been great and the power has kind of vanished. And I think we may be in a situation where Fry kind of is who we thought he was, which is somebody who we weren't really wanting to roster. It's
also fair that the expected stats don't completely believe in him. His batting average is 36 points more favorable than it should be. His front door slugging is 530. The savant numbers say he should be slugging 428, which is a significant gap. He has ordinary hard hit metrics. So as much as I want to fall in love with that walk strikeout rate, and he doesn't chase, which is good, doesn't generally get himself out. Maybe rest of the year, I still think he can hit like 260, 265 or something like that. For somebody who's catcher eligible in a good lineup, I still think that's somebody I want to roster. But I mean, your caveats to Fry are well heard.
Yeah, and I think it depends on that batting average and if you believe in it or not. I'll give you one that I think is probably an easy one. It's Brent Rooker, who was hitting 280, 290 up until about a couple of weeks ago, and was a top 50 player on the Yahoo player rater. Over the last 22 games for him, that's 93 plate appearances. He's hitting 200 with a 42% strikeout rate. Is this regression and Rooker is who we thought he was, or do you think some of that batting average gain we saw earlier in the season is legitimate and he can get back to that?
Well, players who strike out a lot, who hit a lot of fly balls, are always going to be extremely peak and valley slump prone. Obviously, he plays in the just about the worst park to hit in with all that foul territory. There's not a lot of support in the lineup. So the Brent Rooker experience is just going to be months where he hits 179. That's just part of who he is. We saw it last year. End of the year, okay, 246 average. I can live with it. 30 home runs, that's fine. But he's probably a player in mixed leagues that people picked up. And then when he didn't hit for like 3 or 4 weeks, said, okay, I'm done with this Rooker thing. The pixie dust is worn off. And then he got picked up by somebody else. And they rode the wave, 2 or 3 good weeks, and then made 2 or 3 weeks where he didn't hit a lot. He just has a profile where he's going to be, everybody's got some streak to their game. He's going to be one of the more heavy, jagged, streaky players that you have to deal with. And I think if you're going to roster him, you just have to live with that's what you're getting.
Yeah, and I think what you're getting is exactly what you thought you were getting coming into this year, what he showed us last year. Nick Gonzales is somebody when he came up for the Pirates this year, had seemed to show a new level of skill in regards to his plate discipline. Right, he had shown real good improvements with plate discipline in the minor leagues, which had led to a 358 batting average in AAA before coming up. He was hitting over 300 for a while here with the Pirates. He's still hitting 286 in 35 games with the Pirates, which is significantly better than the 209 he put up in his debut last year. He's won the 157th ranked player on Fangraphs over the last 2 weeks. That's a $1 player, but he's hitting 245 over his last 50 plate appearances. So I guess my question is, do you believe that we're going to still see Nick Gonzales as a plus batting average player, and this is just a little bit of a cold streak, but the new skills that he showed will lead to him being able to hit 270, 280 on the year? Or is he more of like that 230 type hitter still, and we're just seeing him kind of go back to that level?
Yeah, I would guess he'd probably be in the middle somewhere, 245, 250 hitter. He does hit the ball hard, but his walk and strikeout numbers are bad. His chase rate is really bad. And this just strikes me as the type of player that once he circulates around the league a little bit, and look, I wanted to be in on Nick Gonzales when he came up. He had some pedigree. He was an early draft pick, and the Pirates are kind of a plucky team. But this strikes me as the type of player that once he gets around the league a little bit and there's a book on him, he's going to be getting himself out more often than not. I still think he'll play the rest of the season. Also, I'd like to see a little bit more power. I mean, 5 home runs is okay. He steals the occasional base, but there isn't a ton of category juice here. So the average has been probably the main part of his fantasy value at this point. I can't see how he hits anything close to 286 the rest of the year. I would guess probably 245 or 250.
Yeah, in looking at his rolling graphs on Pitcher List, I see that his out of zone swing decisions have been like 10th percentile all season long. Mm-hmm. His swing aggression has been up like 80th percentile all season long. So I don't think he's showing at the major league level a better approach in terms of like really understanding the strike zone that would have warranted us saying, oh, he's hitting 290, he's hitting 300. He has warranted this higher batting average. I kind of think he is who he was. And so I agree with you. I think this is regression back toward the mean. And now he's only 25 and he might improve from the 210 batting average last year, but I don't think he is a markedly different player. I don't know that we need to be holding on to him in leagues with him struggling. Again, in deeper leagues, it may be a different story, but in a 12-team league, if you picked him up while he was running hot, I don't believe you're getting a plus batting average middle infield option for the remainder of the season. And so I think you can probably move on from him. Matt Vierling was another player who was getting a lot of hype a couple of weeks ago. He had really kind of looked like a player that was stepping into a regular role for the Tigers and was hitting with a little bit of power, was actually moving up in the lineup and hitting towards the top of the lineup. He's now on the season hitting 257. He's a career 260 hitter, so that's in line. However, he does have 9 home runs on the year, and he hit 10 home runs all of last year. The barrel rate is still up. Yet over the last 2 weeks, he's the 262nd ranked player on the Fangraphs player ladder. That's a negative $6.60 player, hitting 156 over the last 50 plate appearances. Should we have been buying this increased power in Matt Vierling's profile, or was that just a hot streak and he's back to who we thought he was?
Yeah, I think it's probably the second thing. And I say that with some frustration because I do have some shares, had that 4 home run week that we really enjoyed. I mean, he hits the ball hard, but that walk rate is so microscopic that makes me nervous. He actually doesn't chase, but he almost never walks. The Tigers, AJ Hinch wants to put a different lineup out every day. I mean, Vierling did get some time at the top of that lineup, but he could also hit 7th in any given game too. And it's a lesser lineup anyway, probably one of the 5 or 6 worst offenses in baseball. At least we don't have to watch Javi Baez for a while because, man, was that just soul crush. The Tigers have had horrible shortstop production for it goes back to 10 years. It's just nothing seems to work for those guys. But Vierling is probably in a typical mixed league. He's somebody who might be good enough for your bench. You wouldn't want to be playing him every day. And I'm sure in a lot of leagues, he's probably getting thrown back on the wire as people look for reinforcements.
Yeah. We'll do 2 more. We got to talk about Anthony Volpe. Anthony Volpe started out like a house on fire. He is still the 168th player on Fangraphs over the last 2 weeks. So he is still giving you fantasy value because there is speed. He hits in a good lineup. He's hitting leadoff for the Yankees still, but he is hitting 197 over his last 62 plate appearances. A big thing about Anthony Volpe was the swing change he made in the offseason was going to lead to newfound batting average after hitting just 210 last year. Do you think that Volpe is still going to could still be a plus batting average player, or has this recent stretch shown that he may still kind of be the like 230 hitter that we kind of expected him to be when this year began?
I would still expect him to be around 250. And the thing is, I don't see any reason why the Yankees would take him out of the leadoff spot. He's getting on. I mean, he walked last year. It was kind of masked because he only hit 209, but he's going to steal 30 bases. He's going to have double-digit home runs. He may not get back to 21 next year, but at the top of a Yankees lineup that's been better than I expected, I was wrong. Volpe was a guy I liked preseason, but almost every other Yankee take I had, it feels like looks bad or really bad, depending on who the player is. I don't see any reason. The key for me is as long as he keeps the leadoff spot, that's going to get him to 100 runs scored. That's going to get him more volume in a good lineup. I'm still in on Anthony Volpe. I actually think if there's any market panic on him or even mild concern on him, I'd go out and trade for him.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on this. I don't think we're seeing a 280 hitter necessarily, but I think we're probably seeing a 250 hitter, and that's still a clear improvement from last year. I think there are things that he needs to learn and grow from in terms of like there's lots of peaks and valleys with his out of the zone swing decisions, and I think that is going to lead to having a little bit of swing and miss still in his game, or having some poor stretches where he makes contact on pitches he can't actually do damage on, things like that. He is still learning and improving, but I do think there is some legitimacy to the swing changes he made, the approach changes he made, and the growth that he has shown. I just don't think it might be happening as quickly as we thought it was happening in May, when we were like, oh, we're seeing Volpe like take that leap. Like he is a 270 hitter at the top of the lineup. I think he gets there. I just don't think he's there right now. Last hitter we'll talk about is Michael Conforto, who seemed to be enjoying a bounce back, earlier in the year before being placed on the IL. He is the 419th ranked player on the Fangraphs player rater over the last 2 weeks. That's a negative $16 player. He's hitting 081 over his last 41 plate appearances. Do we think this is maybe just like, hey, he's just a little rusty after the IL stint, and what we saw at the beginning of the year is something we can expect him to get back to? Or was what we saw at the beginning of the year the fluke, and Conforto kind of is who we thought he was?
This one hurts because I loved Michael Conforto in the early part of his career when he came up with the Mets. It looked like he was going to be perennial all-star, maybe an MVP contention type of guy, and he's had a ton of injuries. And you look at his splits, right? He's been awful at home, which is no big surprise. San Francisco's a tough place to hit. 217, 253, 301 at home. That means he shouldn't even be in the lineup. And he has really awful platoon splits, but it's against right-handed pitching. Very strange for a left-handed hitter. He's hitting 208, 274, 382 against righties, which makes no sense. He's actually been really good against lefties. And I never am confident he's going to hold up physically for the balance of a season. I think in a mixed league, you need to do better than Michael Conforto in your outfield, and I'd be willing to cut him at almost anybody who looked shiny and new from you on the waiver wire. I'd be cutting Michael Conforto for.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you on that. The contact ability has really gone down, and I think us thinking that he was getting back maybe to a little bit of the guy who maybe won't hit 320 but might hit 270. I just don't think that's a thing, and he might wind up just being a 15 homer guy again, 15, 16, 17. And so I think he kind of is who he showed last year in San Francisco. We're going to go through this real quick because I know that you've got to get out of here. We've got streamers for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I'm going to give you 4 options for each day. And you don't even need to do much analysis. Just put them in order for me. Who would you rather stream on that particular day? Friday, we have got Landon Knack, who looks like he's going to be starting in that Walker Buehler spot against the Angels. Joey Estes against the Twins, Luis L. Ortiz against the Rays, and DJ Herz, popular DJ Herz, but he is in Coors Field.
Yeah, it would have been Herz for me if not for the Colorado start. I can't go there. I don't know how deep they'll let Knack go, but I like what I've seen of him, and that Anaheim lineup does not worry me. So Knack is the first name that jumped out at me.
Yeah, Knack is the first name for me. I like what Luis Ortiz is doing in Pittsburgh. I also like that he's been following an opener, which gives him a better chance to steal a win. But he's pitched really well for them. He added a cutter this year that has been actually like a really effective pitch for him. He's not really regularly throwing triple digits, but he still throws a high 90s fastball. And I think that Tampa Bay offense we've talked about is a little bit flawed. So Knack is my preferred option, but I think in deeper formats, Luis L. Ortiz is somebody who I do think that you can consider if you need a streamer. Let's go to Saturday. We have Miles Mikolas, who's on a hot streak against the Giants. We have Kenta Maeda against the White Sox, Tylor Megill against the Cubs, Chris Paddack against the A's, and Drew Thorpe against the Tigers.
Man, I love what I saw from Thorpe in the first start, and then he was just absolutely terrible against Arizona. McGill's been rattling off decent start after decent start, and the team has played a lot better. Maeda has always been one of my favorites, but in the last couple of years, he's just somebody I don't trust anymore. I lean towards Megill, but because I don't like the Tigers lineup right now, if you wanted to pitch Thorpe, and I realize not everybody's going to go that route after what he did against Arizona, I'd be fine with that too.
Yeah, I actually think Thorpe is first. I think Thorpe is first for me. I think Paddack is second. I don't like the Oakland lineup. Paddack looked good against them before. I would trust going back there. I do kind of agree with you that I would go Megill. I think he's looked really good. And Mikolas, like I kind of believe what he's doing. I would stream all of these guys, to be honest with you. I think Paddack and Thorpe, the top two for me, Megill and Maeda in the middle, only because the White Sox are very bad. And then I would feel totally comfortable streaming Mikolas against the Giants. The Giants are a fine offense, but not, world beaters. And I think Mikolas has made good changes, but he is last for me on this list. Last day of the week, Sunday, we have Jonathan Cannon off his great start. He gets Detroit this time. Reese Olson gets the White Sox. Braxton Garrett gets the Mariners, and Aaron Savali gets the Pirates. Where are you going here, if any of these guys?
Man, I cut Braxton Garrett in some of my mixed leagues. He's just been hard to trust since he came back from that injury. They're really two great starts, and almost every other turn has been really bad. Cannon, I know some starts he hasn't gone that deep, but he's been really good the last two starts. And just Detroit doesn't have that many guys who can hurt you. Reese Olson is the boom or bust pitcher, because he's the last couple of turns he hasn't looked good. But the White Sox, who would you have, two or three guys you have to worry about in that lineup, if that? And then they have guys like Andrew Benintendi. It's like, even if you throw a bad pitch, what's he going to do? Hit it for a single? So a Cannon I'm proactive with. If you wanted to play Reese Olson, I'd be okay with it. Savali and Garrett I don't trust right now.
I agree with you. I am still in on Reese Olson. I think the secondaries are big for him, and they kind of fell off for a little bit, but they've looked good in the last couple of starts, even though the second to last start for him wasn't great, but his secondary started to look better. Again, I don't trust that White Sox lineup. And Jonathan Cannon, I think looked good. I thought the command looked really good. The fastball's up, the splitter and changeup down, or the slider and changeup down. So I would start Cannon as well. And I also agree with you. I can't trust Garrett or Savali. I could maybe talk myself into Savali in a 15-team league if I was desperate, because I don't like the Pirates offense, but those are my picks. And that's our podcast for today. We got a quick one, but hopefully you guys found it important. Make sure, as always, to really look at the context when you're talking about regression to see what is behind it, if there's a stat-based reason, or if it's just kind of a performance-based reason, or if it's just stats going back to what we've expected from them. And important to really kind of keep that context in mind when we have these discussions online as well. You can follow us on Twitter. Scott is at Scott_Pianowski. I am at Samsky NYC. Please make sure to rate and review this podcast. It really does help for us to get it out there. And we will see you next week for more of the Rotoworld Baseball Show.